Have you ever walked into a place certain you'd done everything right? Papers in order, numbers flawless, years of sacrifice stacked neatly in a folder, only to feel yourself vanish the moment someone looks up and decides who you are? That was the air in the branch on a gray Thursday morning when Marcus Reed stepped through the glass doors and into the lemon-clean smell of polished floors. His shoes whispered against the marble as the door clicked shut behind him, and for a heartbeat he just stood there, watching the quiet choreography of a bank that wasn't built with him in mind. Suits leaning over counters, coffee lids hissing, a receptionist smiling broad to one customer and thin to another. "Can I help you?" The receptionist's badge read Cindy, her voice practiced bright. Her eyes found Marcus's face, flicked to his dark wool coat, then to the leather folder in his hands. The smile held, but something in it cooled, like a light on dim. "Mortgage appointment," Marcus said. 10 o'clock. "With Mr. Kent." "Have a seat," she said, tapping the keyboard with nails that clicked like metronomes. "Someone will be right with you." Marcus sat, his folder balanced on his knees. He rubbed the edge of it with his thumb, the way he did when he was trying not to think about how many nights had led to this one morning. 10 years of building his courier company from 3 drivers to 40, of teaching himself bookkeeping at his kitchen table, of saying no to dinners out because tires and brakes don't pay for themselves. His daughter, Tiana, had drawn a purple house on the fridge last week, all square windows and a swing set that flew. "I like the big yard," she'd said, "for Luna to run." Luna was the rescue mutt currently asleep on Marcus's couch. He wanted that yard like he wanted breath. A couple stepped in behind him, laughing quietly, their cheeks wind pink. The man jingled a Tesla key fob. The woman wore a scarf the color of latte foam. Cindy's smile leapt like a spark. "Good morning." "Mr. Reed?" A loan officer with careful hair stood in the doorway. Kent, the badge said. He had the kind of posture that's half habit, half warning. "Come on back." The office smelled like citrus wipes and paper dust. A framed diploma hung behind the desk, next to a signed photo of a local boxer. Kent gestured at a chair and clicked open a laptop. "So, first-time home buyer?" "First time for a house," Marcus said. "Own a duplex, no mortgage. Bought it cash 2 years ago." He slid the folder across the desk and watched the other man's eyebrows quirk. "All documents are tabbed." Kent pulled out the stack. Tax returns, profit and loss statements, bank statements with balances that made Marcus feel like he was holding his past self by the shoulders and telling him he hadn't been crazy. He'd highlighted in blue where the numbers told a story. Consistency, growth, patience. "Impressive," Kent said, the word shaped like a question. "Self-employed, I see." "Yes." Marcus folded his hands. He'd learned not to rush. 10 years, Reed Rapid Logistics. We do final mile deliveries for medical suppliers. Contracts attached, Kent typed. Asked questions he already had answers to. Asked them again, softer, as if tone might uncover a lie. "Any liabilities not listed?" "Child support? Past due accounts?" "You know we'll see them. No other liabilities," Marcus said, even. "Credit score's on the first page." Kent scrolled. His eyes clicked left and right. 792. Huh. Marcus watched a tiny muscle in the man's cheek jump. He felt the familiar heat along his neck that came when the room pretended surprise, like excellence was an accent they weren't expecting to hear from him. He breathed. "Remember the backyard," he told himself. "The tire swing." The way Tiana's voice would sound at dusk. Kent cleared his throat and stacked the papers by corners. "So, the property on Maple. You're making a significant down payment, 50%, Marcus said. He slid a cashier's check copy across the desk. "Right." Kent tapped his pen. "Well, we do have some additional verification steps for self-employed applicants. Nothing major, just policy. He smiled a small procedural smile. Sometimes it takes a bit longer. How much longer? Marcus asked. Hard to say. Kent glanced at the photo of the boxer as if for coaching. Couple weeks? Maybe a month. A month? The word landed in Marcus's mouth heavy. He pictured the seller, a retired science teacher who'd cried showing him the garden. She'd said there were 2 offers, but she liked Marcus's letters, how he wrote about soil and seasons like a man who knew waiting. I was told 7 to 10 business days. For most applicants, Kent said, for this kind of file, underwriting gets thorough. We have to be careful. Marcus tasted the word. He'd built a business around careful, precise routes, on-time delivery, shifts allocated like chess pieces. He knew when someone said careful and meant something else. A knock on the open door. The branch manager leaned in, a woman with a sharp bob and a sharper watch. Lowell, her badge read. All good here, Ben? Kent half stood. Yes, Ms. Lowell. Just reviewing Mr. Reed's application, Ms. Lowell's gaze swept over the folder, over Marcus, over the shoulders of his coat. Her smile was quick, then gone. We're making sure we follow policy, she said, as if repeating a rule in case anyone forgot who wrote them. Especially lately. Lately? Marcus asked. She tilted her head. Gig economy incomes are flexible. We have to protect the bank. The way she said bank made it sound like a fragile thing in need of guarding, not a building that could buy 1,000 houses without blinking. You understand. He did. He understood the way people used words like flexible and protect to step around the thing they didn't want to name. He thought of his drivers, most of them black or brown, who wore company polos and smiled at front desks where their names were forgotten in an instant. He thought of the morning he'd signed the contract with the hospital network and the way the procurement manager had softened when he'd said his daughter wanted to be a doctor. People loved a story if it made them feel generous. Kent slid a paper across the desk. Just sign here to acknowledge we may need additional time. Worst case, we can issue a pre-approval letter with conditions. I don't need pre-approval, Marcus said, quiet. I need a fair decision. Of course, Kent said, already lifting the pen toward him like a reflex. It's just how we do things. Marcus didn't take the pen. He let the silence open. Outside the glass, the laughing couple from the lobby approached a different desk. Cindy stood, a coffee appearing as if by magic. Welcome back, she said, voice warmed to a glow. The man waved in the manager without waiting. Everything about the moment suggested doors that knew which hands to open for. Is there a problem with my file? Marcus asked. Not a problem, Kent said. Just more scrutiny. Because I'm self-employed. That's part of it. And the other part? He watched Kent's eyes slide left, then right, then settle on the paper. Ms. Lowell's voice was cotton soft. We aren't saying no. We're saying we need to be sure of what? Of the source of funds. She smiled like a seal on a certificate. We've had issues lately. Fraud. Laundering. You know how it is. Marcus felt the smallest tilt inside him, like a plane catching a crosswind. He'd spent years making his records boring on purpose, every dollar trackable, every contract clean. He sent his accountant holiday cookies because she saved him time. He wore the same watch every day because Flash invited questions. And still, here it was. A shadow cast over a life he'd built in the open. Okay, he said at last, and took the pen. He signed because the house was real and the yard was real, and some fights you pick with fists and some with paper. He stood, the chair legs whispering on the floor. Please let me know if you need anything else. We will, Kent said, standing too. Thanks for your understanding. Back in the lobby, the heater sighed. A toddler banged a plastic truck against a chair while his mother shushed him. The couple at the other desk laughed again, and the sound skimmed across the room like a pebble on a pond. Marcus paused at the door and looked back, just long enough to catch Ms. Lowell's profile bent toward Kent's screen. She didn't look worried. She looked certain. Outside, the winter light made the street look washed. Marcus took a breath and tasted metal and cold. He could go back to the office, dive into route planning, lose the rest of the day in the comfort of charts and miles and minutes. Instead, he walked 2 blocks to the coffee shop where the barista knew his name. The bell clinked. The place smelled like cinnamon and new plans. Same as always? The barista asked. Actually, Marcus said, make it a double. He took a corner table and opened his laptop. The folder went down beside it, its edges still warm from being handled. He pulled up a spreadsheet, watched the numbers load, accounts, contracts, assets, lines that moved like a heartbeat, and said what words never seemed to say quite loud enough. He scrolled, then stopped. An email pinged from an address he didn't recognize. Subject line sterile. Underwriting request. Source of funds. He clicked. Read again. Somewhere in the middle of the screen, a sentence tightened his jaw. Provide narrative explanation for deposits and rationale for cash reserves exceeding typical applicant profile. Typical applicant profile. He stared at the phrase until it blurred. He could feel, under the polite verbs and bullet point asks, the shape of something older than policy, older than this branch, older than lemon cleaner and marble floors. His phone buzzed. Tiana's picture lit the screen, her smile missing a front tooth. He closed his eyes and saw the swing, felt the rope in his hands. He took a breath, typed a reply he'd learned how to write over a lifetime, the kind that met every requirement twice. Then he stopped and tapped the backspace key, slow, deliberate, until the page was blank again. He didn't want to explain his existence. Not like that. He opened a new document and began to write the story of his company. Not for them, not yet, but for himself. Every contract, every mile, every night with invoices and coffee and the faint creak of an old apartment's radiator. When he looked up, the light had shifted in the shop window, and outside the branch's facade winked in passing cars. He closed the laptop. The leather folder felt suddenly heavier in his hand, as if something inside it had woken and pressed back. Marcus stood, left a tip in the jar, and headed toward the corner where the bank's logo gleamed like a coin. He kept his pace steady. There were questions he still hadn't asked, and he knew exactly whose office he needed to walk back into. The next morning broke with a pale sky that made the city feel hushed, even with buses sighing at the curb and steam lifting from manholes like breath. Marcus dressed with the same care he gave a quarterly report. Dark blazer pressed, knot centered, shoes buffed until they took the light. It wasn't vanity, it was a message. His grandmother used to say, "When they try not to see you, give them fewer places to look away." He parked 2 blocks from the branch and walked the rest, the leather folder tucked under his arm. The lobby doors released a lemon-bright smell and the low hum of printers. Cindy at reception lifted her eyes and assembled a smile, but it stopped short of warmth. "Good morning, Mr. Reed." "Did you have an appointment?" "I'm here for Mr. Kent," he said, and then, without lowering his voice, "and Ms. Lowell." She dialed, murmured, nodded, and asked him to wait. Marcus sat with the folder on his knees and watched the choreography of the room. A man in golf slacks was ushered past a velvet rope with a pat on the shoulder. A woman in a bright scarf laughed at something a teller said and was offered a bottle of water before she could finish the laugh. Marcus's number was called only when the clock ticked 2 minutes past his appointment time. Kent met him at the doorway with that half-second of surprise he was getting used to, the look people wear when the narrative they planned doesn't quite arrive. "Morning," Kent said. Come on in. The office had the same citrus-clean smell, but today the blinds were open, and light fell across the desk in narrow bands. Kent closed the door. "We appreciate your quick response to underwriting," he began, professional smoothness laid over something tight. "They're asking for additional verification." "It's standard for me," Marcus said, placing the folder down and unbuckling it. "You said self-employed yesterday. Today it's me." Kent's mouth flexed, either a wince or a half-hearted smile. "We have to be careful." "Then let's be careful," Marcus said, and he fanned the documents across the desk one by one, each page tabbed and labeled. Balance sheets, brokerage statements, business reserves, the duplex's appraisal, and the rent roll, neatly annotated. Vendor contracts with the hospital network, the auto parts distributor, the lab courier service he'd taken over from a retiring owner during the pandemic and doubled in volume within 18 months. If there's a number, it's in there. If there's a signature, it's notarized. Kent's eyes moved like a metronome, left to right, down, back up. These assets, I wasn't aware of the full picture. He tapped one page as if the ink might be wet. "This is significant." The door opened before he could say more. Ms. Lowell stepped in with her watch flashing like a coin. "Mr. Reed," she said, all efficiency, "I hear underwriting has questions." "They won't after this," Marcus answered, and he slid the topmost sheet toward her. For just a beat, her expression faltered. It wasn't shock exactly, more like the moment a chess player sees a line they didn't account for. "We'll still need to verify," she said, recovering. "Source of funds, consistency of deposits, any recent gifts." "No gifts," Marcus said. "No mystery money, contracts, and profit. The deposits stagger because deliveries don't punch a clock." He kept his tone even and his gaze level, the way he did when a client tried to compress a 4-hour route into 3. "You asked me to explain the narrative. That's the narrative. I built something that works, and I'm buying a home with the results." Kent clicked his pen open, closed, open again. "We can escalate this. I'll request priority handling." "For whom?" Marcus asked, and he didn't look away from Lowell when he said it. "For me? Or for the bank?" Her smile was professionally small. "We want a good outcome for everyone." A soft knock on the glass came from the corridor. 2 tellers pushed a cart loaded with bankers' boxes past the office. The sound of taped lids sliding felt, to Marcus, like an answer to a question he hadn't asked yet. He watched the boxes pass and thought of other offices he'd sat in. The used car lot where the salesman had suggested a co-signer even after Marcus offered to pay cash, the rental agency that wanted 3 months' deposit because high risk, the credit card rep who had asked to speak to the owner while staring at Marcus's name on the application. He remembered the texture of each room, the way the air changed. He remembered deciding, tiny choice by tiny choice, to make his documents boring. No gaps, no gray areas, nothing to hang a doubt on. Lowell cleared her throat. "If you'll leave these, we'll move it along." She stood as if to escort him to the door. "I'll scan you copies," Marcus said, not moving. "The originals stay with me." Her pause lasted only a breath, but he felt the temperature drop. "As you wish." Outside the office, the branch's noise rose and fell like a tide. Marcus walked to the window where the morning sun strobed off windshields on the street. He could have left then, go back to schedules and route maps and the comfort of problems he knew how to solve with a pencil and quiet. Instead, he phoned his accountant. "Read me the last 2 years' quarterly totals," he said. "I want the cadence in my head." She did, brisk and warm, the numbers slotting into place. When they hung up, he called his operations manager to cover the afternoon and then texted his neighbor to pick up Tiana from school, adding a heart and a thank you she'd understand meant, "I'm trying to build you a yard." On his way out, he paused at the reception desk. A couple he recognized from the lobby the day before breezed through the door. Cindy rose to greet them with a glow. "Welcome back. Ms. Lowell will see you right away." A small thing, nothing anyone could point to, but Marcus felt it land. He pushed into the cold and walked 2 blocks to the coffee shop, the bell chiming as if to remind him rooms could ring for the right reasons. The barista slid his usual across the counter without being asked. "You look like a man doing math," she said. "More like a man being measured," he replied, and her eyebrows knit the way a friend's do when they want to say more than they can. He took the corner table and laid the folder open, then opened his laptop. The underwriting email blinked from the night before. Provide narrative explanation. Typical applicant profile. He highlighted the phrase and let the cursor sit there, blinking like a pulse he could steady if he tried hard enough. A memory surfaced. Not dramatic, not headline stuff, just him and Tiana checking out a science kit at a big box store. The security guard had trailed them aisle to aisle, radio hissing. Tiana finally whispered, "Is he helping us, Daddy?" And Marcus had said, "He's making sure we don't need help." He'd smiled when he said it because she was 8 and deserved a world that made sense. But a small muscle in his jaw had clicked the rest of the evening. He started typing an explanation the way lenders like, sterile, dispassionate, rows of dates and invoice numbers. Halfway down the page, he stopped. He thought of all the ways he'd contorted himself to fit other people's forms, the polite language that asked him to make himself smaller to be let in. He deleted the paragraph and began again. Not a speech, not a sermon, just a clean account of how his business ran, where money came from, why deposits landed the way tides do, predictable, but not clocked to a whistle. When he finished, he saved it and stared at the subject line. He could send it, keep playing their game, and hope the goalposts didn't sprout wheels. He could also do something he'd promised himself long ago he wouldn't do unless he had to: pull the room's lights a little brighter. He called a mentor, an older man from his church who'd once run a contracting firm and now advised small businesses for fun because he said people had done it for him. "They're moving you," the man said after listening. "Not the file." "You. They're testing how much silence you'll swallow." "How loud should I be?" Marcus asked. "Loud enough to be heard," came the answer. "Not so loud you stop being the most credible person in the room." He hung up and watched the afternoon gather across the cafe's floor. The bell chimed as customers came and went. He drafted a letter to the regional office. Dates, documents, and the sentence from underwriting pasted without commentary. He wrote another note to himself, a single line underlined twice. Don't ask for permission to be treated fairly. He didn't hit send, not yet. Back at the office, his drivers filtered in with end-of-day energy, the dispatch radio spitting static and inside jokes. Marcus stood in the doorway to the garage and let the noise wash the bank's smell off him. He stayed late making the Monday schedule, kept his hands moving, and when the building quieted, he pulled the folder close and rehearsed what he would and wouldn't accept. He practiced it out loud, just once, to the empty room. The following morning, he returned to the branch with the calm he reserves for icy roads. Steady, no sudden moves. Cindy's smile came and went like a screensaver. Kent materialized in the doorway before she could call him, which told Marcus he'd been watching the lobby. He led Marcus back without small talk. "I pushed your file," Kent said before the door closed. "But there are lingering reservations." "About what?" Marcus's voice stayed soft. The softness wasn't surrender. It was coiled wire. Kent's jaw worked. "The committee wants a narrative explaining why your reserves are unusually high relative to your requested loan, and, this is their phrasing, how a business of this profile generated these balances within the given period." Marcus let the words sit. He looked down at the papers arrayed like a map of the last decade, and then up at Kent, who suddenly looked young. They don't believe the math because they don't believe the person who did it. I didn't say that, Kent whispered. You didn't have to. Ms. Lowell appeared in the doorway as if conjured by the sentence. Gentlemen, she said, and her tone was soda flat. Let's move to the conference room. The underwriting liaison is dialed in. We can get clarity. They walked down a hall lined with framed photos of ribbon cuttings. Inside the conference room, a polycom blinked mute red. Ms. Lowell pressed a button, and a crisp voice filled the space, a woman who introduced herself only as Rachel, Risk. We have Mr. Reed's file, the voice said. We're seeking assurance on deposit origins, consistency, and any potential red flags given the atypical scale. Atypical, Marcus said, and he didn't bother to hide the dryness. Compared to whom? There was a brief static hiss, the sound of someone choosing a path. Compared to our aggregate data set. So your data set can imagine me as a risk, but not as a success. He kept his eyes on Ms. Lowell, whose face had settled into a managerial mask that said, process, while her pupils flicked like metronomes. We don't make judgments based on identity, the speaker said, a line too smooth to be new. This is strictly procedural. Marcus leaned forward, palms flat on the wood he was not invited to own. Then let's be procedural. The contracts in Section B show monthly receivables. The reserves in Section C are retention from those receivables after payroll, benefits, fleet costs, and taxes. The duplex revenue is in D. The brokerage account movements are in E, all transfers documented. If there's another letter you want, name it and I'll draft it before lunch. But I won't write a narrative that explains why it's surprising I can afford the home I've worked for. Silence held a beat too long. Mr. Kent shifted in his seat as the voice returned. We appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Reed. We'll reconvene after internal review. The call clicked off. Miss Lowell's smile reappeared like a screensaver returning after inactivity. We'll be in touch. Marcus stood, gathered his papers slowly, one measured breath at a time. He could feel the cliff under his feet and the wind off it, knew a step was coming that would either be solid ground or thin air. In the hall, he paused at a glass wall overlooking the lobby. Cindy laughed at something a customer said. A security guard adjusted his belt and glanced up. Marcus slipped his phone from his pocket. A draft email to the regional director waited with the cursor blinking beside a single attachment. The underwriting message with typical applicant profile bright as a siren. He looked at the glass reflection of his face, at the room behind him where decision-makers hid behind the word procedure, at the folder in his hand, heavy with the life he had proved again and again. His thumb hovered over send. The phone buzzed before he could tap. An incoming call from a number he didn't recognize, the kind of prefix that belongs to people who never sit in lobbies. He answered and lifted the phone to his ear. This is Marcus, he said, and the voice on the other end took a breath as if about to choose the shape of what came next. The call came 3 days later, a Friday afternoon when Marcus was at his office, sleeves rolled up, eyes fixed on a wall of delivery routes. His driver's voices floated through the dispatch radios, laughter tangled with traffic reports, the soundtrack of the company he'd built from scratch. His phone buzzed on the desk. The number glowed familiar. The bank. He let it ring once, twice, before picking up. Marcus Reed. Mr. Reed, this is Benjamin Kent. The voice was careful, tight around the edges. I wanted to update you on your application. Marcus leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking. Go ahead. There was a pause, the kind where words lined up but none wanted to step forward. Underwriting has raised additional concerns. They're requesting further review, possibly delaying the process. Marcus closed his eyes, the pen in his hand stilled. Concerns. Even after what I showed you? I know, Kent said quickly. I know. It's just there are questions about the consistency of deposits. Some feel irregular. Because they come from contracts they don't understand, Marcus said. Deliveries aren't 9 to 5, payments stagger, but they're documented, signed, verified. I believe you, Kent whispered, voice low, like a man speaking from behind a locked door. But I'm not the only one making decisions. The line went quiet except for the hiss of the connection. Marcus could hear his drivers outside, joking about weekend plans, lives in motion. He sat up straighter, the calm in his chest sharper now. Then maybe it's time someone else makes decisions about your bank. What do you mean? Kent's voice tightened. I mean, I've given you proof. You've chosen not to see it, so I'll take it to people who will. By Monday morning, Marcus's story was in motion beyond the branch's walls. He hadn't shouted, he hadn't raged. He'd written a letter to the regional board, a copy to a local journalist who had once interviewed him about small businesses weathering the pandemic. He attached the email with typical applicant profile, attached the pristine contracts, the tax returns, the numbers that left no room for doubt. He didn't add commentary. He let the contrast speak for itself. One man's diligence, a bank's suspicion. The response was swift. The journalist called first, her voice edged with both anger and disbelief. They wrote this to you? Word for word? Word for word, Marcus said. All I did was apply for a loan I qualified for. By Tuesday, the headline was live. Black entrepreneur with million-dollar assets denied mortgage. Bank sites. Typical profile. His phone lit up with texts, emails, calls. Former clients reached out. Community leaders posted. By Wednesday, the story was everywhere. Shared, debated, dissected. At the bank, panic rippled through glass offices. Ms. Lowell's careful composure cracked when reporters showed up in the lobby with cameras, questions flying like stones. Is it true you flagged his account despite documented wealth? How many other applicants have faced this scrutiny? She offered no comment, but the cameras caught the stiff set of her jaw. Kent called again, his voice shaking. Mr. Reed, we're expediting your loan. Full approval. No conditions. You'll have papers by Friday. Marcus listened, steady, his fingers drumming the desk. That's not enough anymore, he said. Silence. Then, what else do you want? The truth, Marcus replied. Not just for me. For everyone you've denied. By the end of the week, the state's Financial Oversight Committee had opened an inquiry. The word investigation landed on headlines paired with phrases like racial bias in lending and systemic discrimination. For Marcus, it was never about spectacle. It was about a swing set and a garden bed, about proving that his daughter's drawing belonged to more than a fridge door. But now, it was bigger. When the final approval arrived, thick envelope stamped official, Marcus didn't smile. He set it on the table and looked at Tiana, who was tracing shapes in her homework. What's wrong, Daddy? She asked. Nothing's wrong, he said. He touched her hair, soft coils against his fingers. But sometimes people make it harder than it should be. She looked up with wide, serious eyes. Did you win? Marcus thought of the cameras, the headlines, the hurried calls from executives who'd never before spoken his name. He thought of every quiet injustice that hadn't made the news, every applicant who'd walked away without a yard, without a garden, without a chance. I didn't win, he said softly. We did. Every time the truth comes out, we all win a little. That weekend, he stood in the yard of the Maple Street house, keys cool in his palm, the soil damp beneath his shoes. Luna tore across the grass, tail streaming like a flag. Tiana shouted with joy, her laughter carrying into the trees. Marcus breathed in, long and deep. The house behind him was solid, its windows catching the sunlight. But it wasn't the bricks that filled him with pride. It was the fight, the proof that dignity could not be erased by policy, that resilience could bend the weight of silence until it broke. As dusk settled, he looked straight into the camera of the moment, into the eyes of anyone listening, and let the words come clear and low. This isn't just my story. It's a reminder. We belong in every room we've worked for. We've earned every yard, every key, every dream. And no policy, no prejudice, can take that away. He let the silence hang, heavy but not hopeless. Then his voice gentled, an invitation and a challenge all at once. If you've ever been told you don't fit the profile, remember, you're more than their picture. Share your story. Stand your ground. And if this moved you, add your voice here. Comment, speak, subscribe, because the more we tell the truth, the harder it becomes to ignore. Marcus glanced at the swing swaying in the twilight breeze, at his daughter's smile blazing brighter than any window, and his closing words rose like a promise, not just to her, but to everyone watching. We're not just surviving, we're building, and we're not going anywhere.